Welcome back to another Thursday night virtual tasting experience.
Yes. Can you refocus our camera?
Yeah.
I feel like it's doing a little bit of a weird thing. There we go. That's a little better. Perfect. All right, as we get started here, we're going to give people a few minutes to roll on in here. We already have almost 25 people, which is awesome. I'm going to throw a poll up so we know kind of where you're at with Mezcal, if you're new to it, if you're already an enthusiast. We like to know who we're chatting with. So if you could take the poll, we would love that. And then also throw in the chat where you're joining us from, what you're drinking.
Yeah.
You know, let's get the party started in the chat.
What your relationship is to Mezcal.
Yeah.
Again,
I ruined you. I'm so sorry.
You ruined me. I keep mispronouncing it.
I know.
So for anybody that needs clarification, the emphasis is on the first syllable, like it is standard in any Spanish word. But
I've been messing him up because for some reason I like Frenchify the word and I say mezcal. I try to like make it like fancy, and so I kept doing that all week.
Mezcal.
And saying, yeah. And
Mezcal, so, Suzanne. And now I've caught it.
Yes. Blame me. All right. I say we get started because we have lots of good stuff to talk about tonight, and we have about 25 people here. More people will roll in as they finish up work and all that fun stuff. So thank you everyone who's here tonight. We're excited to have you here. Before we even start, let's everyone raise a quick glass and do a little cheers to those of us starting off the night. Yeah, I love that. Love to see everyone having a nice cocktail or sip. So for those of you who are new, I'm Suzanne.
And I'm Evan.
And I'm the founder of the Crafty Cask. And the Crafty Cask is all about celebrating craft alcohol makers and producers. So whether it's spirits or wine or anything else like that, cider, beer, all that good stuff. So we really are all about craft. And so we do that through, a lot of times we do in-person meet the makers. So we've been doing those for a long time. And then with this new crazy world we're living in, we've turned them virtual, and honestly, they're super fun. I think, I don't know if they're more fun than our in-person meet the makers, but they're up there.
Yeah.
So we're hoping we get to keep doing them even after all this craziness begins, and that you all want to keep doing them. And then we also help craft alcohol makers by teaching them about marketing. So I have a whole craft alcohol online boot camp that helps teach them the ins and outs of how to market their brands and get their brands in front of people like you who are interested in them and want to try them and want to sip on them. And so that's me.
And I'm a certified sommelier and a certified cider professional. And for the last decade, I've been doing kind of bespoke wine tours up in Napa and Sonoma. And similarly have a very strong passion for craft alcohol producers, notably obviously wineries, given what I do, but I'm an equal opportunity drinker, and particularly excited about tonight because I grew up in Arizona and I spent a fair bit of time in Mexico traveling around. I think I've been to 13 states in Mexico with my parents.
I didn't know that. That's a lot.
Yeah. I guess absorbed their appreciation for agave-based spirits at an age that is younger than they would care to admit if I called them out on it. So this has been a fun opportunity for Suzanne and I both to combine our passion and love for craft alcohol producers and continue
and their products, their delicious products.
Yeah, and continue to share that passion with people since we can no longer do it in person anymore.
Yeah, we feel like we're doing the good deed of helping all of you stock your home bars during this with delicious craft alcohol. So hopefully, I know quite a few of you are regulars and have been back here a few times. And so I know you've gotten some great ciders, some great wines. Now you have some great mezcal. So we're excited that we're helping you drink well while you're stuck at home and support these amazing craft makers too. Because times are tough for everyone right now. But when you rely heavily on people going to bars and going to restaurants and coming to your tasting rooms and that disappears overnight, that's a hard thing to deal with. And so that's why we're really excited and why we really hope that some of you bought some of their products already to join us tonight. And then hopefully we'll make you very jealous if you don't have it and you'll want to buy some tonight or tomorrow morning as well. And so we'll be throwing up links for where you can buy these. They're both offering some discounts, so you also get a nice little perk for being an attendee. So yeah, so support our craft makers, and thank you for being here. We're gonna jump right in. Christopher, Yuan, Kevin, give a wave so everyone knows who you are. So since we're gonna talk a bit. So those are our makers there. So Christopher is joining us from Los Nahuales, and Yuan and Kevin are joining us from Erstwhile Mezcal. And so we're excited to have them here, and we'll let them do most of the talking in a little while. But first,
a few things to get through. The events coming up in the next couple of weeks. If you are interested in joining another one of these, hopefully you enjoy yourself tonight and want to come hear some more. Next week we'll be doing summer sippin' ciders, and we'll be featuring Hemley ciders as well as Seattle Cider Company with some really fun
jalapeno cider, grapefruit cider, some really kind of fun
orange
ones.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. And then the following week is going to be bourbon.
And we're actually, so Christopher's company, Craft Distillers, is one of the importers. And so we actually grabbed the low gap bourbon right there. So they'll be one of our bourbons actually joining us. And then we have another bourbon maker joining us too. And let me tell you, this low gap bourbon here,
it's killer.
Evan's been having to hit my hand to keep me from drinking it before the event arrives, because
we gotta have some left.
Yeah, it's a really nice sipping bourbon. Like, it's quite lovely. So we're excited about that. And then I think we have some vodka coming up, some Rhone varietal wines coming up. So all sorts of fun stuff.
So just briefly, we're going to go over some tech tips to help you feel comfortable with Zoom in case this is your first time using Zoom. And even if it's not, perhaps there's some things about Zoom that you didn't know were possible, capability. So
wait, first I want to tell, we have people here from all over. So this is kind of fun. We have people from Tennessee, Missouri, Honolulu. So we have someone from Hawaii joining us, Texas, New Mexico, Brooklyn. Let's see, Orange County, San Francisco. Oh, and your parents are chiming in. So Evan's parents must be here. They said that they had no idea how Evan was carrying on while under their roof, drinking all their mezcal and tequila.
I mean, I wouldn't
all
say all because they tried it. I was like, well, never trying that again.
And Elaine's here from Ho Chi Minh City. So we're going international tonight. And I know she's a big mezcal enthusiast and very jealous that we're drinking this since it's a little hard to get over there.
Colorado.
Yeah. Oh, and Blake's definitely digging the ciders. So love that. Hopefully we'll see you next week for some delicious cider.
Wonderful. Come back next week.
Yeah, for sure. And take the poll if you haven't already. It's still up. I'll leave it up for a little while, but do you want to jump into the kind of tips real quick?
So your best experience is most likely going to be from the computer, and the gallery view is what's recommended so that you can see all of our lovely faces enjoying mezcal. Here,
we'll show you real quick. So for those of you who are a little newer here. Sorry, I'm behind the 8 ball, babe.
It's okay.
I was having too much fun.
So kind of just brief overview there. That's how you switch over to gallery view. You can't do it right now because we're sharing a screen, but once we're done, that's the button you press to make it.
And that's fun because it makes it look like a party. You get to see lots of faces instead of just those of us who are talking.
And then
and that's what you see when you toggle.
And then down at the bottom there, you can toggle on the participants and chat room. You can actually pop those out as well, but that's where you'll be able to enter in. Well, it looks like a lot of you have figured this out already. But those of you who are wondering how to chat and tell us where you're coming from.
And the participants view is cool because it lets you see who else is here. So if you maybe know someone here, and then you can also message with them directly. So you can message all of us, but then you can message directly and talk a little smack about us behind the scenes if you want. We don't get to see that.
Chatting is really helpful if you want to, send a message our way or ask a question. You're also going to be encouraged during this to unmute yourself and chime in with any questions that you might have. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, there's also a raise your hand feature that's right there under the participants list. And that way you can get our attention and we can, when there's a break in the conversation, call on you and let you have an opportunity to make your comment or ask your question. And that's usually the best way to get our attention because the chat box can be kind of crazy sometimes. So reading through those and getting to your question might not be the quickest way.
And a nice pro tip for muting, especially because it's important. Once you mute yourself, please unmute yourself. Please mute yourself again, mostly just for background noise. You may think it's quiet at your house, but there's things happening. And It just makes a better experience for everyone. But a nice pro tip is instead of even using the unmute mute button, if you just hold your space bar down, I haven't even started drinking yet. If you just hold your space bar down, that will unmute you and you can talk while you're holding it down. And then as soon as you let go of it, it will remute you. So that's kind of a nice, easy, quick way to do that as well.
Worry about remembering to remute yourself that way. You can, we mentioned you can message people privately in the chat, and then we'll also be sending out links in the chat box with information about where to buy Los Nahuales and Erstwhile, and then information that also might come up. Let's see. Yeah,
those are the big ones.
Yeah, I think that for the most part that covers the tech stuff.
If you're having any tech issues and you have a virtual background on, that can sometimes slow things down a little bit if there's some lags, delays.
Yeah.
Also, if you're on your phone and it's not working super well, computer can sometimes work better. So, but otherwise, we've had pretty good luck with Zoom being nice to us. And so if you have any issues, just let us know. And,
don't worry about grabbing the links out of the chat box while we're doing this, because we'll also send out an email tomorrow with the pertinent information in there as well. And for those of you that want to support these amazing producers and their wonderful products, it's a great way to do that. Go on there and buy some of these products because they're amazing if you don't have them in front of you yet.
Yeah, we're really excited about these tonight. Otherwise, I think just our house rules are please engage, please talk, make this social. If any of you have been to other virtual tastings already, lots of them are going on right now. A lot of those tend to be done in webinar view, so you don't get to see everyone's faces like this. And we intentionally do them this way to hopefully encourage you guys to talk, to chat, to be engaged. Because how often do you get to kind of get online and talk to the people who are responsible for getting the delicious booze in your glass?
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool to get to talk to them directly and ask them your questions and all that good stuff. So we encourage you to do that. Otherwise, I'll talk like crazy in front of the space.
Yeah, if you don't, I mean, I'm going to have all the questions for Christopher and Juan and Kevin if you guys don't. So please chime in. All
right. So let's talk mezcal.
Yeah, mezcal. So this is a really pretty fascinating, amazing product that I think that for a long time, at least in the United States, has been kind of derided as something that is inferior and kind of for the peasants.
Had a bad rap.
Yeah,
for a while. Had a tough go here.
People think of bottles of tequila containing a worm in them, and honestly, most of the time those were actually bottles of mezcal. And it wasn't even a worm, but that's something neither here nor there. The origins go back a long way. It's something that kind of evolved out of the Maya and Inca alcoholic beverage before distillation called pulque, which was fermented agave sap. And it was generally just used for ritual consumption. And when the Spanish arrived, they figured out that was another source to create distillate instead of using sugar and grapes, which they were kind of restricted from growing here because of the producers back home that were growing those things. And with this discovery, implemented their distillation techniques that they brought over from Spain, and began making agave-based spirits. So mezcal is kind of generally the broad umbrella that most other forms of agave-based spirits fall under, and it's kind of the oldest and most traditional.
So there's that whole, all tequilas are mezcal, but not all mezcals are tequila.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
There's that kind of confusing little thing.
Square is a rectangle, but a rectangle isn't a square.
Yes,
exactly. Necessarily. There are some definitely some stylistic differences. The primary one being the solid matter in the mash that is created when you roast and then mash the agave plants. So these beautiful plants that
you'll see some pictures.
Yeah, you'll see some pictures. Have these giant leaves that are spiky that stick out of them. Running around in the desert in Arizona when I was a kid, the smaller versions of these I came to know as shin diggers, because if you weren't careful where you stepped, they took a chunk out of your shin. These are harvested when they become mature, which is
so long.
It can be a very long time for
Yeah.
certain types. 20 years is not an uncommon number. And we'll get to why that is something that, a lot of sustainable, mindful producers of mezcal are aware of and are focused on.
I believe as well, not only is it a long maturation period, but to really have the healthiest crop, it should be rotated as well. So
right, like most crops.
After that 10-year or 20-year growing period, something else should be planted there for a little while before you can start your next crop. And
letting the ground kind of rest. But yeah, fascinating by comparison to a lot of other beverages, simply because of the fact that it does have that length of time that you're kind of required to wait before you can make product from the things that you might be planting.
And that's one of the reasons I think, early on. So if you've had some bad mezcal in the past, which I think probably a lot of us have, a lot of this is what Evan's talking about right now, which is, bigger brands and bigger producers realizing that this trend is starting to get hot and really trying to cut corners and really trying to take this thing that is one of the kind of oldest art forms and is like, to really make this the right way, you have to do it in a slow, artistic kind of way. And that doesn't work for big booze. Big booze needs to churn things out fast. And so they cut corners and they do things differently. And honestly, they don't always take the best care of the people who are growing things down there. And so they can kind of opportunistically come in and exploit, to get what they need and then leave. And so that's why with all spirits, and all booze, I'm a big believer that supporting crafts, supporting artisans, local is, really important. But with this in particular, especially as it's getting more and more popular, it's even more, because we have the opportunity as consumers to ensure that mezcal stays this beautiful art form that it is, and we can get high quality stuff here versus buying the maybe cheaper stuff that isn't grown the right way. The people aren't getting taken care of as well. And so we have an opportunity as consumers to influence that and to vote with our dollars and really support the makers who are doing it right. And so that's one of the reasons this is so important to us, and we love doing what we do, is to help kind of spread that gospel a little bit.
Very much so.
And I personally, my experience with mezcal, so for a long time, I would always order these, I live in San Francisco and we have great cocktail bars here and great cocktails. And so when mezcal started getting hot, there were a lot of great mezcal cocktails, and I would sound delicious with like grapefruit and thyme and and I would order it and I would take a sip of it, and it would just be like a smoke bomb in my face. And I would just be like, where's the grapefruit? Where's the thyme? Like, why did they even mix these things in there? All I can taste is smoke. So for a long time, I was kind of like, because it's funny, I love super peaty scotch. Like the peatier, the better.
Right.
So I don't have an aversion to smoke, actually. I really love it. But just for some reason in mezcal, I wanted a little bit more of the nuance. I wanted a little bit more of the flavor beneath the smoke. And I wasn't finding that a lot because often they were kind of lower quality mezcals. And so I've learned now, as I've gotten introduced to better producers, that there's a whole spectrum, just like with scotch. You can find ones that are super smoke bombs in your face, and you can find ones that are really balanced and delicate and still have that hint of smoke, but really kind of balances it out. And so that's as I went down that journey and, maybe kissed a lot of mezcal frogs along the way, I finally started to find, my princes of like, oh, I do like this. This is really delicious, but it took some effort. And so if you think you don't like a type of alcohol, keep trying.
And we'll take the hard work out of it for you whenever possible by curating them for you.
For sure.
You touched on a kind of an interesting note that I imagine that John and Kevin or Chris might touch on as well, but this idea of mezcal as being something that is kind of unique in the categorical sense, because for the most part, rum, whiskey, gin, vodka, and even, tequila, which again, of course, is technically a mezcal, have kind of in many ways fallen prey to industrialization and mass production and commoditization. But by and large, the majority of mezcals that are being produced by families that are making small batches of this product just for their communities. And it is, the quality of it varies depending on their capability and their dedication to it, not so much due to the influences of mass production. And so in many ways, it's kind of one of the last of the world's, great spirits as a general kind of idea. Of course, there are fantastic examples of all those categories I just mentioned, but there's also lots and lots of mass-produced examples. And so keeping it the way it is now as much as possible is in the hands of the consumers that demand that they get the quality that they're looking for.
Exactly. Yeah, we missed that boat with gin because most of us weren't alive back then when that was all happening. And gin, it was a similar thing with gin, where it was like gin had a bad rap because people were taking shortcuts and making it kind of in not the best way necessarily, just to make more money. And now you see gin having this amazing resurgence because we're coming back to the roots and we're coming back to the art. And, so we have that opportunity to kind of be part of that right now with Mezcal, which we're super excited about.
Jump on board.
Yeah. All right. And speaking of those amazing families and amazing makers and, all of this good stuff, I would love, first of all, to hear if Christopher and Yuan and Kevin want to dispute anything you just said.
Yeah, me too.
They're the Mezcal experts. So if there's anything we're saying that's not accurate, or you have a different spin on, let's just maybe talk for a minute about Mezcal as a category and at total. And if you have anything you want to chime in with, and then we'll turn it over to Christopher after that. Any thoughts?
Something I would just add is that, I agree with everything that you're saying. And the Mezcal has taken quite an interesting, turn and, has quite the history first and foremost. 300 to 500 years of history of families just doing it generation after generation and not having that commoditized aspect. And just doing it because it's literally their vida, their life. It's a part of every religious ceremony. It's a part of every celebration. It's literally their medicine. It's more than just an alcoholic beverage. And it really touches deep down in terms of how it's made properly. So it has this huge history in the past. But it's not until just recently, literally in the past 10, 20 years, that it's really started to become somewhat of a commoditized thing. And by all means, you want to touch upon those families as opposed to, well, of course, now that it's a hot category. And as you mentioned, you saw all these cocktails, and it was really the craft cocktail guys that really drove forward the brand. And, Ron Cooper, obviously blazing the trail with his brand. Introducing people to handcrafted mezcal, but and now obviously all the big boys are jumping in to try to capitalize on that. But with that said, with the knowledge and the exposure to it, there's just all these amazing mezcals that are available to us now today, and bringing those small little villages and those small handcrafted, diamonds, if you will, up to the United States. I've been lucky enough to see the transition. I've worked with craft distillers now for, I don't know what it is, 14, 15 years, and we've been working with Donzantes, Nahuales, etc. Since about 2004. So we're kind of on the front end of all that. But to see the evolution and to have this available, it's spectacular. And going back to the aforementioned, to have some of that available, to be able to taste that now and not have to necessarily go down there, which, by the way, if you can get down there, please do when we travel again. But no, I agree with everything you're saying. It's just, the history and the evolution of mezcal is pretty interesting.
Well, just to clarify, Christopher represents the sole importer, exclusive importer, correct?
Of Los Nahuales?
Correct.
Yeah.
And works very closely, with the family in Oaxaca that produces it. Obviously being mezcal, the production of this is not in the United States. And so while, and also, for example, Erstwhile is based in Brooklyn, New York, the product that Erstwhile is selling is still produced in Mexico, and their story and their connection they'll share later. But Craft Distillers is their I guess the importer and also the company that you work for, as opposed to working technically for Los Nahuales. But I know that you I have a very close relationship with them. So
yeah, this is a little bit of a different event for us because we do typically have the makers on, but this is really fun because it's, you know, the people who were smart enough to discover these things in Mexico when they were there and say, this is delicious, we better get it back to the States. And so we're excited about that. Juan and Kevin, did you guys have anything to add about just Mezcal as kind of a category topic?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. This is Yuan.
You muted?
And we're not muted. This is Kevin. We are founders of Erstwhile Mezcal, and it's great to see friends here, old faces and new faces. Completely agree with everything that Suzanne, Evan, and Chris just said about Mezcal, and to their point about small family producers, that was really the impetus for why we started Erstwhile, the company. So, you know, Erstwhile is an importer, and our introduction to Mezcal was, we were fortunate that we were directly learning about Mezcal, not from a book or from a movie, but directly there on the ground in front of small producers in Oaxaca. So that was, fortunately, that was our introduction, and it made a huge impression on us. But the thing that struck was, one of the first things that I noticed that is the disconnect between how many great small producers there are in Oaxaca and other parts of Mexico making great mezcal for generations in their family, and consumers here in New York and really all over the country who, like us, would love to support these families and buy their mezcals, but there just seemed to be a disconnect from our perspective as a consumer, as consumers, looking around, you know, back home in New York and generally all over the country. So that disconnect was really the inspiration and impetus for why we decided to start a importing company from scratch, with the hope to support not just one or two families, but going forward as, you know, one family at a time, but as many families as possible going forward.
Yeah,
So,
that's great. I love that. And it's such important work, and it's, you know, speaks to our passion and our heart as well, because we similarly are supporting craft makers, and then you as a craft maker and importer are supporting another maker. And so it's just a nice value chain.
Circle of life.
Yeah, like rising tide lifts all boats. And if we all support each other who are doing amazing things, you know, share it with the world, then we'll succeed and build thriving businesses that can compete with big booze with their big budgets and all that, you know, and that's what we're all trying to do.
Anybody else have something to share with regard to your relationship with Mezcal? Brandon, you got your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah.
I just had a question, I guess, for you and the importers in the call. I agree with the small family, like the family-run small batch from Oaxaca, largely. And that's part of what I love about it. And I just wanted to hear thoughts on the craft distilling boom in the United States and people that are largely importing agave syrup and then trying to pass things at, I don't know if they're, I guess they're legally allowed to call it mezcal. I guess I don't know the answer to that either.
I think they have to call it agave. I think they have to,
spirit.
Yeah, I think they have to call it agave spirit. I don't think they can call it tequila or mezcal. Yeah.
I know they can't call it tequila. I wasn't sure about mezcal, but
yeah.
So I just wanted to know what, like, specifically the importers' thoughts were on that market.
Great question.
Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, so for that, I mean, like, agree with Suzanne and Evan. So mezcal is a, it's a controlled term. It's a denominational origin, just like tequila or champagne. So there is a entity called the Mezcal Regulatory Council in Mexico that controls all things related to mezcal. What can be called mezcal? What is not? So one of the steps is certification. So that a producer needs to be a certified producer of mezcal in order to call it mezcal. But aside from the technicality of it, our personal view on mezcal is agnostic, in the sense that if it's good quality, it's good, made by good people, we'll import it. And whatever, the name doesn't really matter. Is it mezcal? Is it agave spirit? Is it destilado de agave? Personally, I don't really care. but to comply with the regulations of the CRM, to respect, we do everything, we try to do everything the right way. And, so everything we import right now is all certified Mezcal, but just to comply with everyone's, regulations. But as individuals and as a company, we're agnostic toward, does it say Mezcal or not on the label.
I think that's actually a bigger consumer kind of issue, because I do know a few distillers who make agave spirit. And I think their challenge, honestly, is how to communicate with consumers like, this tastes like tequila, it tastes like mezcal, but it's called agave spirit. And that's a hard barrier when people are at the shelf and looking at things and trying to figure out, like, wait, agave spirit, what's that? Is that the same thing? And so it's kind of a consumer education thing, that if that trend continues, and if US distillers continue to want to make those spirits here, like they bring over sugarcane and molasses to make, rum here, how do we educate consumers to know that, A, it's a little different, it's not made in Mexico, and some people are okay with that, some people aren't, but to be transparent, and then B, it is that same product, essentially, and so I think that's the challenge for producers who are doing that.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a double-edged sword in some ways. Regulations obviously are designed to protect the people that in this case, name kind of regulates, but it also kind of omits and keeps out people that might be doing the same thing, especially, I guess, with regulations that pertain to geographic delimitations.
Right.
Because if you're not within a border, you can't call it champagne or tequila or whatever it might happen to be. But I think in general they do more good than harm. And debate me, please.
Well, I guess the second part of my question was, like, part of what makes mezcal good to me, like, is that it's coming from a family that's been doing it for generations, right? And if a producer in the United States is just importing the syrup and they're not using the clay pots and like in the ground and like all that stuff, is it really the same product?
Yeah.
And like and to be clear, from a business side, I have definitely advocated distillers to do this, but at the same time, as a consumer, is it really the same?
But it's just a choice, in the sense that even within Mexico, there are many uncertified producers, and they make great distillado de agave that can't legally be called mezcal. But, it's just like there are tons of Italian restaurants in New York that don't have a single Italian working in them. They make good Italian food. They make their interpretation of it. And if someone is inspired by the way mezcal is made and the flavors and the taste and wants to give it a try in the United States or in Italy or Europe or wherever, I say go for it. It's, but, there's always a place for the masters who've been doing it for generations.
A quote from the founder of our company is that being a craft distiller allows you the opportunity to make an amazing product. It doesn't guarantee it. I mean, the ultimate deal is, regardless of what you're tasting, true colors will show. So, if someone is importing, as you said, agua miel or whatever, and distilling here, versus, something being distilled from, a 10-generation family in a clay pot still in a small village in Oaxaca, you're going to taste the difference.
Well, and it's interesting. I wanted to just bring up an example. Sorry guys, not to throw another brand in the mix here, but you actually can't even get this product anymore. But so there's this idea of being a master distiller. And the idea of being a master distiller is that you've hands-on distilled every source product, basically. So tubers, so like potatoes, grain for whiskey, agave, sugarcane. What's the fifth one that I'm missing? Grapes, sorry. And grapes. And so that's kind of the way you get your master distiller cred, is to say that you've hands-on done all that yourself. But the agave one is always a little tricky because you can't really do that in the US. So Charbet, they're very proud with their master distillers, and they went down. So this isn't even on the market anymore. They made this once. They only made it. We're very fortunate to have a bottle of it. We take a teeny little sip every once in a while. But so they went down to Mexico and got to know a family and actually made their tequila at their distillery with them so that they could feel comfortable saying, we are officially master distillers, and we made the tequila ourselves in Mexico. And now, you know, they have that kind of cred. And so it's a fun thing to think about. But to your point, Brandon, like, not all consumers care, right? And so that is where it's like the juice in the bottle, if they're bringing in the agave, you know, liquid and just doing it here, might be just as delicious. Sure. It could be amazing. It's just some consumers really care about that origin story and that like process and the romance of it. And those consumers are our people, are the people that, you know, love the Crafty Cask and love what we're doing, because we agree. It is part of it's the story, it's the experience.
Yeah, the romance is a big part of, I guess, any product that's craft. I think that's what draws people to a lot of these products.
And honestly, that's what helps you swallow the often slightly higher price point, because you're like, you want to support those people and you want to keep that story going and keep it alive. Yeah.
You feel good supporting the people that are making it as opposed to a publicly traded company.
Yeah, right. All right, fun conversation. I love it. So I want to cut over and let Christopher tell us a little bit about Los Nahuales. And as he's talking, I have a few visuals, and so I'll put some of those up as he's talking as well. But Christopher, I would love to have you kind of tell us the story and who the family is and what you know about them and everything.
Sure. So, well, I mean, there's a lot to be said about the company. Los Danzantes, as they're known in every country outside of the United States. Unfortunately, there was a naming rights issue that forced them to have to rename the brand Los Nahuales in the United States. By the way, a Nahual refers to a shaman in Oaxaca that supposedly can shapeshift into his animal spirit. Kind of correlating the shift of an agave into an amazing spirit, obviously in your copita or glass, etc. But history of Danzantes, specifically, I'll just refer to them as Danzantes, are basically two twin brothers, Jaime and Gustavo Munoz, who actually started a couple restaurants. I believe now they own 5 restaurants, both in Mexico City and Oaxaca City proper, back in the early 90s, actually. And so they were honestly late to the game in terms of mezcal, historically speaking, but they wanted to start a house brand for their restaurants. And they started with tequila, the obvious choice initially, before, you know, early 90s, before the explosion of mezcal, and not only here, but also in Mexico. So something to kind of grasp or have, you know, I mean, we've had this big explosion in the past 10 years or so here in the United States with mezcal. Something that most people don't recognize is in Mexico itself, mezcal was kind of more the working man's drink. It was kind of like the moonshine of Mexico, right, for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it wasn't really a commoditized resource. Again, back to what I was alluding to earlier in terms of it just being part of everyone's life there who made it. It wasn't something that they were trying to make money off of necessarily. But nevertheless, these two twin brothers were looking for a house agave distillate for their restaurants. And they were pretty turned off in a nutshell in terms of what was available in terms of tequila and the people that they had to deal with and the ultimate quality or lack thereof of what they could get. So then they started looking in Oaxaca. So in about 96, 97, they bought a distillery in Santiago Matatlan and converted that into Los Danzantes distillery. And from that point started distilling various mezcals. They've grown over time. You know, just to talk about who's running the distillery now is a woman, Karina Abad Rojas. She's got a master's degree in chemistry, and she's just this amazing woman who can tell you about all soil types statewide and how they influence pretty much you know, everything in terms of distillation, etc., and the ultimate flavors that are going to come. That's her there. There's Karina. But yeah, she's a brilliant woman, very honest, very very humble and incredibly knowledgeable. And not only does she run Los Danzantes production in Santiago Matatlan, which has expanded certainly since the early days where they were just distilling a joven. And at the time, they were trying to replicate somewhat what tequila was doing in terms of having a reposado and also an añejo. But they expanded beyond that. They developed relationships in all the small little villages that you know of now. I mean, some very common ones like San Luis del Rio and San Juan del Rio, etc. And that evolved into another project that's actually, I said not to speak, but that's Don Valente Angel in San Andres, kind of near Michoacan, but that's a producer that makes San Andres Alipus for them. So they developed this brand Alipus, which was to bring attention to everyone that we've been discussing, all these individual producers in these villages, and ultimately to bring money and resources to them. The project was ultimately to bring those people money. So much of her time is spent up in the mountains, helping to bring their mezcals to market, and ultimately money and resources to those people. And then beyond that, we developed a brand called Mezcalero, which was a single batch wild agave project, which was first of which actually in the United States. So they've evolved over time. They've got, quite a production going on, amazing people working for them. Huge sustainability practices. For example, they're working with a university in the Yucatan to maintain, I think they've got 300 to 500,000 plants in the ground of semi-wild agave, such as Tobola, etc. So doing very good things in terms of mezcal as a category and providing amazing products.
That's great.
Yeah, kind of a general rundown of what's going on with Los Danzantes.
Cool.
Chris, just kind of a brief thing that you touched on there. You mentioned a wild agave mezcal, and if you could just kind of expound on, the difference of, cultivated and non-cultivated, the wild ones, and their availability, and perhaps, the wild species resistance to cultivation, if that is in fact the case, and just kind of let the audience know a little bit more about what is entailed with wild agave spirits.
Sure. So yeah, it's certainly a huge thing now. I mean, anyone that's jumped into the rabbit hole certainly is fully familiar with all the amazing brands and all the wild agave and or semi-wild agave that's available currently. But yeah, again, back maybe just 7 years ago, it wasn't the case, and luckily later tonight you'll get to taste an amazing one from Erstwhile. But so back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when it was just El Maguey, there Tobola coming in. That was kind of everyone's first exposure to wild maguey or semi-wild maguey in the United States. And generally speaking, for those of you unfamiliar, espadín is the most commonly utilized maguey in mezcal production, just because it can be cultivated and it can be controlled. And some argue that it's the genetic mother to the blue agave from tequila. And beyond that, most wild maguey, and just to speak to it, it's an argument whether how many different maguey there are first and foremost, but most of those are wild, and literally you have to hunt in the mountains for hours to find one that's fully mature. And you alluded to it earlier in terms of some maguey like tepezate, for example, that can mature for up to 25, 35 years before it's ready to be harvested and ultimately converted into sugars and distillation, etc. So yeah, wild maguey is just that, and they're very rare. And in order to make a single batch of mezcal, you've got to get about a truckload of maguey to make about a 60-gallon batch of mezcal. So to harvest, a truckload of 25-year-old tepezate from the wild that you randomly find, you're going to start you're going to start making those things increasingly rare, right? And you know, fortunate or not, I mean, that's obviously what all the mezcal nerds gravitate towards. And you know, when it became a boom here, that's absolutely what sold me and what I started looking for, and certainly others do, and justifiably so. But with that said, it's a finite resource, and it's something that needs to be protected. And I mentioned, you know, in terms of Danzante's program, they're certainly not the only ones. There's many people that are maintaining amazing maguey. But yeah, it's something that needs to be maintained. It's again finite as it is wild. Fortunately for Danzantes, a lot of the guys that they work with in the Alicus project have learned how to grow various types of maguey, whether that be Karvinsky types or Sierra Negra, one of the producers does in San Juan, and on and on. But yeah, a lot of these guys have figured out how to cultivate it. And as you mentioned, yeah, it's elusive in terms of figuring out how to grow these different maguey.
Cool. And so, Christopher, I would love it if you would, because this is an Espadín, correct? The Los Nahuales. So can you tell us a little bit about this specific mezcal? And so if those of you at home who have it, hopefully you're already sipping on it and you're not waiting for this. Like we have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about what we're drinking here.
Well, the project itself, and back to our relationship with Danzantes, etc. I mean, yes, we are the importer, but we're also the #1 market for them in the world. And on top of that, we have a lot of influence on, well, certainly the products that come into the United States. And back to talking about CRM, et cetera, and the various laws and whether they're good or bad. And there's certainly arguments on either side. This product plays into that whole process. So back to the NOM laws and Comercam, as CRM used to be called, they used to have this NOM in place that was basically just reflective of tequila. And again, back to mezcal being just this wild kind of whatever distillate that anybody could do whatever they wanted. And by the way, that definitely justifies a lot of those, you know, agave distillates, et cetera, being brought in because they don't want to adhere to whatever these laws that have been put forth. So Comercam put basically tequila laws on mezcal to just try to harness it and rein it in and whatever. And one of the requirements was that any exported mezcal had to be brought to proof with water. And you know, pretty much until, you know, laws changed about 3 years ago, every single mezcal that came in the United States was brought to proof by water. But if you've been to Oaxaca, you know that it's a long-term practice that if you're going maybe Palenque to Palenque and tasting still proof mezcal and wanted to buy some on the spot, a lot of times those producers would just bring the proof right in front of you with the tails of the first distillation run and taste you on it, like, oh, and get it to a proof that, you know, it was agreeable to you, and then sell you that product, and you fill up your milk jug or whatever it is and go about your business. So we wanted to show that. And this was a project that our founder wanted to start to show that process.
Hey, Christopher, can I just interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
I just want to explain for people who don't know, in distillation, when you're distilling something and, you know, it's coming off the still, the way that you're really deciding what makes it into your bottle is it's kind of a tasting it. It's kind of a, you know, looking at the temperature, looking at all these different elements. And there's really 4 components, but 3 main components. So there's the heads, the hearts, and the tails. And the heads are kind of usually discarded. I can never remember which ones are the ones that can make you go blind, that are really the more dangerous ones.
I think it's the heads.
Yeah.
Heads are nail polish.
Yeah, so
Right.
heads are basically nail polish. So that's the first thing that comes off the still, kind of. And so that's discarded. And honestly, a lot of distilleries use it for cleaning and things of that nature. And then the hearts is what the majority of what is making it into a lot of most bottles are. And then the tails are kind of, I don't know how you explain it. Like, they're not like watered down necessarily, but they're kind of
They're more oily and viscous, correct?
Yeah, I think so.
It's the last stuff that volatilizes at the very end that finally
Right.
makes it out in the tails.
And so they're not,
Much less alcohol. So yeah, I mean, the alcohol's volatile, it evaporates, etc. And yeah, you've got less alcohol.
More of the oils
Right.
and the.
and so those aren't necessarily dangerous, but you don't want a ton of those in there like right from the start, just because it changes the flavor and it changes things. And so it is kind of an art that they're saying, we don't want to use water to proof this down. We actually want to use those tails that still have that flavor and kind of that profile of what we just distilled and use that to proof it down. And so it is a unique thing that it sounds like just recently was available to do here to bring into the States that way. And so it's kind of it's a fun thing. And also another kind of fun note is, so when you're tasting spirits and you wake up with a wicked hangover the next day, a lot of times that is distillers who are not being as careful and not being as artful with that, really like getting those cuts just right and really being super pristine about it. And they often sometimes have a little bit more heads in them or have a little bit more, and so it is this science experiment kind of getting it right. And that's what I love about craft distilling, is it really is an art of how do you, like, where do you make those cuts? And one distiller might work with the exact same batch and make the cuts in completely different times, and another distiller might do it differently and it will taste different. And so it's kind of, it's a fun thing about this, that they're proofing it down with the tails.
Yeah, absolutely. And to elaborate on what you're saying, yeah, I mean, craft distiller is all about that. It's all about the hand of the producer, and it's about his or her experience and their knowledge, and obviously their palate, etc. And that's what craft spirits are all about in a nutshell. And to go on about mass-produced spirits, absolutely. So it's very expensive to take a true heart's cut, where you're getting, you're cutting out like 2/3 or more of your ultimate distillate and throwing it away. It's hard to convince bean counters at large companies that you're going to go throw away 2/3 of your product. Therefore, mass producers typically don't, and they allow a lot more of both, and they add a whole bunch of sugar and glycerin to make it taste better. And back to those hangovers, easily had in those mass-produced products.
Totally.
But back to Comercan turned into CRM, and ultimately coming up with a new nom that was better ultimately to classify mezcal. That went through about 3 years ago, 2017, I believe it was, and it changed everything. So right about the time that we're releasing this product to show adding tails to bring to proof, which, by the way, as an aside, brings up all these floral components. It's much higher alcohol than putting water in the product is just that, diluting it, right? I mean, just straightforward. And by all means, most mezcals that are in the market, most of our mezcals that are in the market are brought to proof with water, and they're phenomenal. But this just brings something different to the table. But CRM brought in these new laws, etc. This is now considered an artisanal mezcal. And it can be called mezcal. This is now allowed in mezcal production. So you will be seeing this, man. You already do see this in many brands that are available. So this happened right at the same time as we were releasing this product. But yeah, it's a pretty interesting product. To talk about it specifically, in terms of what they utilize and flavors that you're going to find. They roast with mesquite wood. That's very apparent in their production. They add a tepache, so you get a lot of pineapple components ultimately in their production. But then back to bringing to proof with this higher alcohol versus water, of course, with the tails. And again, this, I don't know which versions are out there, but this is 52.4% alcohol that I'm tasting currently. And it's got these amazing floral components, and it doesn't taste that hot. I mean, by all means, the alcohol is there.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, I was commenting on the weight that I feel like the tails add to it, because I do feel like this has, you know, a texture and
viscosity, sure.
yeah, exactly. And to mimic your comment on the floral component, it certainly has like an aromatic levity that I guess kind of defies the heat that you feel when you kind of waft it over your nose. You're like, oh, that's going to be kind of refreshing, dare I say. And then you're like, oh, no, this is serious.
And you get the left hook.
Yep. Yeah, it's quite a complex and yeah, engaging tipple.
Do people ever, someone was just commenting that they like the higher proof stuff because, you know, they think they get more flavor out of it. And I was just curious because I was just going to ask, do people do this with mezcal? Because I know with whiskey, adding a dropper of water to kind of like really start to release things is common. I don't feel like I see it as much with mezcal and tequila. I don't know as much,
but I like doing it.
Is it a thing in this world? Yeah?
It's a thing in my world.
I don't think it's a thing in the general mezcal culture. However, it's definitely a thing chemically. I mean, by all means, you can add water and help to open things up, etc. So it's valid.
We have a question about pairing, and so we're sipping on it straight, Brandon. But pairing it with citrus is amazing, and we actually have been playing around with these a little bit this past week. And so we
cocktails.
We made kind of a smoked paloma kind of spin that was really fun with the mezcals. And then last night we made an old fashioned with these, so a mezcal old fashioned that was really fun. There's an IGTV right now. Yeah, showing Evan being the cocktail maker there. So they're beautiful to sip straight.
Yeah,
they're so.
It's almost it almost feels like a travesty to mix these with anything, and I say that having just mixed it with some water. So, so when I decided to make a cocktail,
I meant like pairing it with like tahini and
or
something like that.
Okay, like kind of almost like a chaser.
Yeah, not like you're taking a shot and then like
Sure.
sucking on it, but often I just remember when I was in Mexico, probably Mexico City, where I'd go to mezcal tasting bars and they would always give me a tray with different citruses on it.
Maybe coated in a little chili powder or salt or both.
Yeah, in Oaxaca, you're generally going to have you're typically going to have grapefruit, actually, or an orange, with sal de guasono, so worm salt, with chilies, worms, and salt, you know, together. And certainly you'll see that reflected here in a lot of the top bars or indoor restaurants throughout the United States as well. And by all means, yes, absolutely pair it with that, with mezcal.
Yeah, and it's funny you say grapefruit because when we were making the old fashioned yesterday or the other day, you know, normally old fashioned has an orange in it or a slice of orange peel in it, but we were both immediately like, this calls for grapefruit for some reason. Like it just felt that, and luckily we had a grapefruit on hand, so it worked out well. But it is, it really like grapefruit with this is, yeah, really nice. Yeah. Awesome. Well, this is a beautiful mezcal.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's spectacular, and
ooh, the water really opens up
I think
nose.
Having tasted through both the Los Nahuales, Metodo Antiguo, and then the Erstwhiles that we'll get to in a minute, I think that was kind of what drove us to decide to make a cocktail like an old fashioned, which is just one of the simplest kind of things. And you know, the addition of just a small amount of a couple of good ingredients and seeing how they can change what is already a beautiful product on its own to give you something to play around with was really fun.
And I would encourage you guys, so I was asking if adding water was a thing, and now I've decided it is a thing because it really, adding just a couple drops of water has really changed the nose on this pretty significantly, and even the mouthfeel and the taste, and it's not better, not like, it's just different, and it's really fun to kind of do that. So if you're sipping on some mezcal at home tonight, I would encourage you to like pour yourself another little taste and do it with some water and do a little side by side. It's kind of fun to see what that does when you lower that proof a little bit and how it opens it up. Well, can we all give Christopher a cheers before we kind of move on to Erstwhile and hear about theirs? Thank you, Christopher. That was great.
Nada, thank you guys.
Cheers.
Of course.
Susan, I had a question, or I guess Christopher had a question, if I may. I noticed the smokiness of this one is like on the lighter side compared to other ones I've thought of or I've tried, and I was wondering if that's a function of the roasting of the maguey, or is it like the tails, or both, or you know?
I think it's the production process that Karina manages in general, as I alluded to, in addition to just what they're doing in general in terms of, you know, not just their products, but back to Ali Poos, if you're familiar with that brand, and it's also their brand, but it's products from each of these individual producers from various single villages. You'll find the smoke to be very balanced in every single one of those products. And whether that's an influence of Karina or whether that's just, you know, historically what each of those individual producers have been doing, I think ultimately that's what you're going to find, you know, just generally speaking, in a great craft, anything, right, is balance. Life, right? Balance is great life.
Yeah.
And that's that. You know, they figured it out. They figured out, I mean, by no means are they cutting any corners or roasting any less time or whatever else. I mean,
I didn't mean to say
5-day process. There's certainly plenty of wood being utilized, and each of these guys, you know, I mean, I mentioned in terms of Danzantes or Nahuales, they're using mesquite, but you know, you get different wood depending on which producer in Ali Poos you're going to. Every single one of them has just figured it out, right? I mean, again, they're not cutting it short. The smoke is there. It's 3 to 5 day process underground. They're not trying to not import smoke, but it's just balanced. And I think it comes down to the distillation processes and the lengthy fermentation processes, etc., to really kind of balance that out and make sure that all things are as they should be.
And it's funny, you know, I've actually heard kind of the opposite, Christopher. So not that quality would be a concern when there's not a lot of smoke, but that sometimes if you get that real punch in your face smoky, that can be an indicator of smoke taint, actually, that the way their facility is set up, while smoke is happening over here for this batch, it's getting into this batch over here earlier than it should be, and that it's making it kind of smokier than maybe you would otherwise do it. And so that sometimes those really smoke bombs can be more of an indicator of like, maybe there's a little, you know, smoke taint in there or quality kind of thing. So Yuan and Kevin, I would love to switch over, and I definitely want to hear all about your brand story, but I would love, actually, because we just tried an Espadin, I would love for you to first tell us about your Espadin so people can try them side by side if they have both, and we can compare contrast, and then maybe get into like your story of everything, just so, while we have these sips in front of us. I have it in my
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everyone. This is Yuan, co-founder of Erstwhile Mezcal, for those of you who joined late.
I'm Kevin.
My co-founder.
Also,
Thanks for being here, guys.
Yes. So yeah, our Espadin, to your point earlier, to Chris, what Chris point earlier about, you know, heads and tails, ours is also cut with the body and heads and tails. There's no water involved.
Cool.
This Espadin is, so we currently represent 2 families, both exporting for the first time to the US via Erstwhile Mezcal, the platform. We are an importer, for those of you who aren't already aware. This is the Garcia family, and this is Silverio and Epifania are the couple behind this Mezcal. And everything else in our lineup is a different family, including a Tobola you'll try later. But Espadin is just the Garcia family. So this is their debut in the US market. It's 49% ABV, or 48, 49%, depending on which batch you get. And that's just kind of their natural preference. So depending on the family, let's just say Espadin, pretty much every producer we've ever met makes an Espadin, because as we're discussing earlier, Espadin is such a common varietal. It's kind of the I don't know, the bread and butter of agave varietal used. So, but that said, you know, every family has their own preferences in terms of what's the ABV they make, they prefer with Espadin or any other varietal. but this is the Erstwhile Espadín. Kevin, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, not particularly.
You want to tell us anything about the flavor profile or notes or anything like that you guys get when you drink this? Or Evan, you too, you have a.
So I
compare it to.
I mean, I feel like I get a little bit of kind of a cedar note. Like there's a little bit more of kind of a woody characteristic to this one comparatively. And I think that's simply by comparison. There's obviously still very bright floral aromatics and some beautiful citrus notes, but yeah, like almost like cedar or like sandalwood or something like that. I don't know.
I get a slightly more sweetness in this one too. Like I get a little bit of maple syrup
on the
palate,
palate.
On the palate. Yeah, I get it, and I like that. I like the little bit of like maple syrup or like kind of like just in the middle of my palate. I get it, and it's kind of nice. It balances with the smoke nicely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can see that, or maybe kind of like a little molasses almost. Yeah, it's very nice.
This is a little sweet, and we've always attributed that to the fact that the little kind of niche, the microclimate where it is distilled has its own unique yeast, and so the fermentation we notice is particularly virulent, and it yields a slightly sweeter mezcal.
So yeah, and then just a bit about location. So the Garcia family, they are based in a place called Rancho Blanco Huila. Doesn't really show up in Google Maps, but if you Google San Pablo Huila, that's the closest village that pops up. It's not too far from Matalan, which is Chris was saying, the Danzante's distillery is based in Matalan. Where our other producer is also from, but Rancho Blanco Huila is not too far in terms of driving distance. It's like 30 minutes from Matalan. That said, our experience is that even two places that's 30 minutes apart can have very different, not so much altitude, they're about the same, but see the natural yeast that's floating in the air could be very different.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Like we've noticed yeast from certain villages, not always, but sometimes you kind of taste this commonality of certain commonality with all the mezcals from that location. So the point is that even if they don't seem that far apart on a map, that the natural yeast that's in the air, it could be very different, which affects ultimately the flavor of the mezcal.
For sure, yeah. So tell us a little bit about the story of the families and kind of how you guys got involved in this, and tell us the Erstwhile story.
Yeah, so Erstwhile story, I mentioned a little bit earlier. So Kevin and I were not in the wine and spirits industry. We had completely different careers. Kevin still does, as a matter of fact. He's an antique map expert. So we started as mezcal consumers.
Wait, did you say an antique map expert?
Yes, I own another company called Geographicus. We are probably the largest or second largest dealers in rare antiquarian cartography in the United States.
Cool. I love old maps.
I'm like, I'm not just going to let that slip by. Hold on a minute. Antique maps. That's cool. What a cool, that's juxtaposition.
That's really neat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wow.
So, Kevin, I was practicing law full time. Kevin was and still is, an antiquarian map dealer and scholar. And we started learning about mezcal together with our first trip to Oaxaca together. And that just opened a whole rabbit hole. And as I was saying earlier, we were really fortunate in that our first introduction to mezcal was directly in front of small producers. Two of whom we currently represent in our first shipment. These two families we actually met on our very first trip as students, enthusiasts, just on a day trip. And, they're outside of Oaxaca City. We fell in love with mezcal, obviously, and also with Oaxaca, the place. These two things kind of are side by side, but I mentioned this earlier that one of the first things that we notice is this disconnect between small producers of mezcal and consumers back home in the U.S.
Yeah.
With the idea that we can go and bring this mezcal back in our suitcases, which we did for quite a few trips, and that was sufficient for our own needs. But, you know, I personally was always interested in thinking about doing something bigger than myself. How can we scale this and bring this to other people like us back home? So short of a round trip flight to Oaxaca and getting a rental car, which I highly recommend for everyone who has the time to do that. For people who who are not able to get to Oaxaca or anywhere else where these producers are in Mexico, how can we connect like-minded consumers like us back home with small producers who pretty much all the small producers we met on these trips, they don't have, their sales are very local. So they're selling to their neighbors and their friends, maybe for a birthday or Christmas, but they don't have sales in Oaxaca City, let alone Mexico City, let alone outside of Mexico. So we just saw this very obvious disconnect in my mind. And I don't know, Kevin, if has anything to add to, I don't know, the origin story of Erstwhile.
Mm-hmm.
No, that is essentially the story. We traveled to Oaxaca. We fell in love with the product and the people, and we saw a place where we could do some good and create something special. It's in the sense that there are a lot of families that we met who make great mezcal, who want to export, who cannot overcome the legal hurdles. They're busy making mezcal. They don't have the resources or the time to, set up a, export facility and distribution in the United States and promote and sell it. So what we want to be is an avenue for them. And so far it's working out pretty well.
Someone was curious, when did you begin the Erstwhile label and begin importing?
So this idea, I would say, the idea was percolating, but I would say about 3 years ago, early 2017 was when we incorporated a LLC. So, it's all milestones, right? But at the time, I was still practicing law full time. So there was a year of just prep time getting our importer's license. 2018 was when, a year later, I quit my lawyering and pretty much got on a plane and flew to Oaxaca the next week and spent most of 2018 living in Oaxaca, being there on the ground, working with our producers.
Very cool.
Our style, just as individuals, is to be very DIY, very hands-on, not outsource anything unless absolutely necessary. And that's every aspect, like working with the producers, approving the labels, sourcing the bottles, just getting the labels approved here in the US, working with our distributors, two of whom are actually with us tonight in our Zoom meeting. I have Rick Long from Bowler, our distributor on the East Coast for 3 states, and I have Martha and Paul from PM Wine. Cool. That's New Mexico. So just, working with like-minded distributors here in the US, it's a labor of love. So we're super hands-on. So that was 2018. And then our first shipment came into the US late 2018. So last year was 2019. That was our first year of sales in the US, which reminds me, so one part of our mission is to build national distribution here in the US for our partner producers in Oaxaca, who, by the way, are independent families. They don't work for us. They're just partners that we source mezcal from. But with the idea that here in the US, we can build distribution for them one state at a time. I mean, it's work, but it's happening slowly but surely. And then here we are in 2020.
That's great. I love that. We're big supporters of people who take the leap and follow their dreams. Since, I've done that myself and left the corporate world to start the Crafty Cask, and it's fun. It's a roller coaster.
Cheers.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's awesome, especially when you bring delicious things like this to us. So.
Yeah.
Do you want to
just
tell us?
I was going to say just a brief aside, because the question came up also for craft distillers, and for those of you that might be curious, craft distillers has been around since 1981, 82, and I believe correct me if I'm wrong, Christopher, but it was Germain Robin that was the first micro distillery.
Who's a legend.
That is
Legend.
I mean,
Yeah. We started Germain Robin in 81, 82. Quick, I don't know. I don't want to spend too much time here, but you know, the genesis of our company was our founder, who was a history professor at Berkeley at the time, and bought a 2,000-acre ranch up in Mendocino. This was 1974. He bought that ranch. He was driving up Highway 101 in 1981, picked up a hitchhiker who was Hubert Germain Robin, who had just sold their cognac distillery to Martel, who was, you know, just really disgruntled over kind of the bastardization of all those small handcrafted family-owned producers in cognac. And you know, obviously he told his story to the history professor, and together they sourced a 100-year-old pot still from where Hubert grew up and brought it over to Ansley's Ranch, and they started distilling all the noble varietal grapes in Northern California that birthed Germain Robin, and started this, you know, back to obviously what Juan was speaking of, you know, trying to get craft spirits through this distribution network in the United States is brutal, and we've been fighting it for over 30 years. You know, no one wanted handcrafted brandy from Northern California in the 80s and the 90s, etc. And we figured out a way to navigate that, etc. And then along the way, back to, you know, bring it back to mezcal. Ansley found mezcal, and here we are. You know, I mean, we're importing mezcals, and for all the reasons you mentioned. You know.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so Johan, Kevin, let's move over to the Tobola, because
which is a fun treat, because a lot of the mezcals we find here in the U.S. are espadine, so it's always fun to try the different.
Tell us a little about what makes this special and why it's just delicious in my mouth.
So this is our Tobola. Our Tobola is a wild agave. There are some people who are attempting to cultivate it, which is great. It tends to grow at high altitudes, so you won't see it right around Oaxaca City until you get up into the highlands. But once you get there, it's everywhere along the side of the road. It's about the size of a basketball, a little bigger, a little smaller, depending on where it's growing. Some people say it likes to grow under oak trees. That may be true, but as far as I can tell, it grows
a lot of places
pretty prolifically at high altitudes. But perhaps because it is a smaller agave and is growing in this oxygenatedly deprived environment, by comparison with some lower altitude agaves, it does tend to be a little bit sweeter, a little bit rounder on the palate. It's a very approachable mezcal, and yet it can also yield a great deal of complexity. We're very proud of our Tobola. Most of our mezcals are not exceptionally smoky. The Tobola is no exception, but it does have notes of vanilla and almost dessert creme brulee essence. It's wonderful. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything about the taste. I'll pour myself a little bit.
Yeah.
Right
So to Kevin's point, the Tobola, by the way, is by the Hernandez family. So I mentioned earlier that our first shipment, we are representing 2 small producer families exporting to the US for the first time. The espadine earlier, that's the Garcias. This is a slightly older couple. They're kind of like almost like my aunt and uncle. That's how I think of them, not, you know, quite grandparents' age, in their 50s. So that's Juan and Hortensia Hernandez. Evan and Suzanne showed some photos earlier on the screen. So those are Hernandez photos from their family distillery. And the young lady with the agave field, that's their daughter Lydia, who's my friend, kind of, and who is about my age, who actually went to law school and came back to work for the family business. So that's the family behind the Tobola. And everything else in the Erstwhile lineup right now, except the espadine, is by the Hernandez family. So it's our line right now is kind of debuting the Hernandez family to the U.S. market, we brought in 6 different expressions, including the Tobola.
So that's pretty, is that, I mean, I would assume that that's rather uncommon, that the Hernandez family has such a broad, I guess, collection of different types of agave that they're using to make their mezcal, considering it seems like, at least Espadín in my perception, is what is found regularly, generally, easily.
Yeah, that's one of the things that, we like the Hernandez family a lot, and they're family friends by now, but one of the things that really struck us, starting from the first time we went to their home and distillery, is just the sheer number of varietals they have. They kind of have this, some family just, they make an Espadín, or maybe like, let's say 2 varietals, or whatever, or just one. But if you go to the Hernandez family, it's like walking into a museum or a collection, like this encyclopedic, vaguely mad scientist-esque, like shelves and shelves. Some of them have herbs infusing it, or snakes, but it's a different thing. And
I mean, Juan loves to experiment. He loves wild varietals. He makes Espadín like most producers, but what he really enjoys is finding something interesting, like learning and experimenting, and just like perfecting his craft and growing as a distiller and as a producer. So he's constantly playing with different ideas. Like if something comes available to him, he's like, I'll try it, let's do it. And that's how our Henneken came to be, which is our most exotic agave, something that's not typically made into mezcal, but that he did. So and even within the more traditional agave groups like the Tobola, he plays with different ideas, different methodologies, trying to learn something new, trying to bring something new to the market.
Yeah.
Very cool. And a lot of it he keeps for himself, as you had said. You only discover like the full richness of his personal library.
He has a personal collection.
As you get to know him over many, many years.
Those are good friends to have.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. So everyone, let's give a cheers to Erstwhile for introducing us to these delicious mezcals.
Expressions.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Salud. Salud. Yeah. And so we'll open it up for a few minutes. We're getting close to our ending time here. We're always, if people have questions and if we're chatty and if we're talking and having fun, we can stick around for a little while. But we'd love for you to, unmute yourselves, raise your hands, throw your questions in chat, whatever way you want to engage, so you can kind of just chit chat about mezcal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Juan and Kevin, I was kind of curious, especially the producer, the Hernandez family, that has so many different, varietals of maguey that they produce. How do they go about either foraging or harvesting? And, we touched briefly on the concept of sustainability for a product that is such a long maturation. How do they address that, I guess?
So most families small producer families we met, including the Hernandez family and the Garcia family, our 2 partners, they have some land, but to make mezcal in a quantity that's viable, to bring a viable income to the family, they have to commercially buy their agave elsewhere. Okay. So in a sense, they are tied to the supply and demand of agaves as being sold in the market. So far we met one family that just has so much land that they're independent, they're self-reliant, and just can source most of their agave from their own land. But with the exception of that one family, most of the families that we know and have met are tied to the broader supply and demand for agave.
Well, there's that, or they're producing in extremely small quantities for their own use. Okay. Maybe, but if they're selling, typically it's hard. You have to be a very wealthy family to own enough land to reasonably maintain your production. The other thing, though, with some of the villages, especially in Oaxaca, is that the villages own communal land. And so the producers within the villages, they can get together and they know, it's like, oh, there's a tepestate maturing. Who's going to get it? Let's make a deal. And so that's kind of, you know, one of the ways that they work. But you know, especially for a more commercial, high volume agave like Espadín, a lot of it is purchased from regions that specialize in growing Espadín, but not so much in producing mezcal. Whereas you know, something more limited like a Tobalar, or Queño, the Tepestate certainly. You know, these are purchased or sourced through communal arrangements within the kind of the commune village.
Yeah, and then Martha and Chris in the chat history right now bring up a good point, right? So it's this idea of what agave is available and sustainability is an ensemble. So we didn't really talk about ensemble much tonight, but it's basically any mix of different agave varietals. 2, 3 more can be called ensemble. So it's a very broad word, but it's this idea.
And that's a type of mezcal. So you would say ensemble on the bottle.
Right, it's spelled like ensemble, but it's an ensemble, or sometimes they call it mezcla. But so you just have to, it's like, okay, well then what's in this mezcla? What's in this ensemble? You just have to read the label a bit more. So but the idea is that, or they call it a field blend maybe. So with this idea that it's just, I have 3 different kinds of agaves that are mature and ready for cooking. Maybe each of them isn't enough to make a batch on its own, but I can put them together and then make a blend out of it. And that is something that's commonly done. We do have an ensemble currently in the Erstwhile line. It's a half Tobalar, half Tepestate, which is a good one to try right next to the 100% Tobalar.
Oh, look, we have it coming up here. Show us that again.
There it is.
Oh, cool.
Oh, there we go.
I was going to ask you about that blend. So it's blended during production, not after they're distilled and then blended later. I was kind of curious about that.
That's right. So what happens is from the cooking point forward. So they'll harvest the agave, they'll gather them up, they'll arrange them in the oven in a particular way. So like some agave piñas are long and thin, and these will maybe go around the outside, and some are really big and they need to be closer to the fire in order to cook. So you might get a big Araqueño or a Tepestate or Espadín, you know, put closer to the fire. And so they'll arrange it and then they'll cook it together. And that's the essence of it, because as they're cooking, I can't tell you chemically, but things happen in there. The flavors influence one another. The way the sugar metastasizes in there, it influences each other. And then once that's pulled out, they mash it together, they ferment it together, and ultimately they distill it together. So it is not a post distillation blend.
It's really a marriage from the get-go.
I love that. That's actually one that I was excited to try when I was looking at the site earlier. So
yeah,
good.
Cool.
Thanks for the explanation on that.
The flavors are very cohesive together. I taste Tepestate first, followed by Tobalar, but I'm definitely more interested in other people's tasting those on the ensemble and any of our mezcals.
That particular ensemble is a true 50-50 blend as well. So sometimes you'll get ensembles that are 15% Tepestate or something, because Tepestate is in fact hard to get and expensive. But this is a true 50-50 blend. So he wanted each of these flavors to emerge, and in fact it's a very nice combination. Tepestate is verdant and forward. It hits the front of your palate. Tobalar, on the other hand, is round and sweet, and it hits the back of your palate. And so they work together kind of magically.
It's pretty fascinating how I think that this topic, this conversation about ensembles is kind of akin to a misunderstanding, or I guess a kind of a learned belief about lots of different things that are blended. People think of wine blends as being kind of somewhat inferior for some reason, simply because they're not varietal. And
Although
blended
Bordeaux
scotches
and
and this, this example of ensembles, and the art of blending two things together so that one of them can diminish the negative characteristics of the other and enhance the positive characteristics, and that one can do the same thing to the other, is really a big part of the art of distilling, of brewing, of winemaking. And I think it's a pretty fascinating topic to delve into.
Sounds like a future event where we do a blending session right on camera.
Compare these things by themselves
and then blend them. It'd be fun.
There's one other question, and I do know that we're over time here briefly, but it was a question about agave productivity, and I know that this varies drastically depending on the type of species that you're talking about. But if you are cultivating a particular type of maguey, what plot of land is roughly equivalent to a certain number of barrels or bottles of mezcal? Can you give us any rough estimates? Maybe for Espadín, just because it's the most common.
Well, I don't know if I can give you an estimate, but I can give you a sense of it. So Espadín's a large agave.
Right.
So typically, producers will plant Espadín roughly 5 to 6 feet apart. And as they mature and become, fully growing Espadíns, they will almost like their leaves will intersect with one another. They're
massive.
Yeah, they're very large. So, you can get easily a 300-pound. I was once at a contest where they had an 800-pound Espadín, which is ginormous. But, and so, for something like that, you need much less. But maybe UN has some insight into exactly how much you need to make a certain amount.
I've heard one tobala, when mature, would be equivalent to maybe a bottle or two.
Maybe a thimble. A tobala
wow.
is only this big.
We're exaggerating a bit.
A tobala is only this big. So
drastically different.
So that's not going to produce a bottle, right? So
it's part of why it's hard to answer the question, because the agave varietals are so different in average size. Like I could hold up a Tobola Pina, the cord of agave, potentially with my own hands, but I'm not even going to try it with an Espadín or the skinny. Like if it's a Karwinski, they're long and skinny.
What about Espadín, since that's the most kind of commonly found one? What do you think how much Espadín do you need to grow to make a bottle even, or a?
It takes about a truckload. So Espadín is about 160, when harvested, it's about 160, well, assuming it's fully mature. So there's plenty of people harvesting Espadín early, but say it's fully mature, 10 to 12 years, 8 to 12 or so. It's about 160 pounds once it's harvested.
Okay.
And it takes about 4 men to put that onto a big truck. It takes a huge truckload to make about a 60-gallon batch of mezcal.
Okay. So that's about a barrel. And then, of course, the other component of the question was per year. And there's another drastic difference.
They all grow at different.
Some mature in 8 years and some mature in 25 years. So
yeah, exactly.
I know it's a hugely varied answer, but
you can harvest it 4 years and just keep it churning and get some nasty stuff and produce lots.
Well, everyone, we want to be respectful of everyone's time, so let's put our products up here and give everyone give everyone a cheers one last time. Thank you all for coming and learning about mezcal with us.
Christopher, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
this was delightful.
Thank everybody for being here.
Yeah. Everybody else, thank you for showing your love for Mezcal.
Yes.
Mezcal loves you too. And you'll feel it tomorrow because this stuff doesn't give you a hangover because
That's right.
it's so clean.
It's so clean. It's so good.
It's so pristine and
Yeah.
so delicious.
And so we threw some links in the chat there where you can grab your bottles with some nice discounts. We'll also send out an email tomorrow morning to remind you and give you all the details you need. We would love to see you at future events as well. If you had a great time tonight, feel free to tip your hosts. We're on Venmo at the Crafty Cask. We hate to ask it, but you know, we all need to make a living somehow here. And so yeah, we really appreciate you, and we really love your engagement and your questions and your comments. It really helps keep this lively and fun for everyone. And so thank you for coming, and I hope you got some bottles of these. If you didn't get some bottles of these, make sure to go grab some because they are
they're
amazing.
delicious, and you're supporting a good cause and some wonderful families, as you've learned tonight, that are doing something that is part of their tradition, that's part of their community, that's part of their their livelihood.
Oh, and it's funny, Whitney made a joke or a comment being like, trip to Mexico, anyone please. And we were just talking, so we're both turning 40 this year, and we were both talking about, like, we think we just want to go to Mexico for our 40th and do a joint 40th and invite all of our friends and family. So, you know, if you come hang out at these enough, maybe you'll get an invite.
Hey.
We can all go to Mexico and tour some of these amazing distilleries. So maybe a trip to Mexico, a Crafty Cask trip to Mexico is in our future.
I like it.
All right, cheers everyone. Have a wonderful Thursday night. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Take
Till next
care.
Thursday. Cheers.